She was asked to play a simple waltz for the Duke, but her music changed his entire world. Nobody in Vienna talked about Elise the way they talked about the other musicians in the city. They talked about the men with grand titles, the ones who performed on big stages with flowers thrown at their feet. Elise was not one of those. She was quiet. She taught piano to the children of shopkeepers and bakers in the afternoons, and in the evenings, she played alone in her father's small apartment near the river, with the windows half open so the sound could go somewhere. Her father, Franz, had once been a respected music teacher himself. Not famous, not wealthy, but respected. The kind of man his students remembered 20 years later and talked about with soft voices. He had taught Elise everything he knew, and then he had watched, with a kind of quiet pride that he never quite managed to put into words, as she surpassed him entirely. Elise was 24 years old in the spring of 1887. She had her mother's hands, long fingers, steady and sure, and her father's eyes, the kind that noticed things other people missed. She had been carrying a particular sadness for 8 years, ever since the fever took her mother when Elise was 16. She never spoke about it much, but anyone who sat quietly while she played could feel it in the music. Not in a painful way, more like the feeling you get when you look at the sky just after sunset, that last bit of color before everything goes dark. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It was brought by a servant in proper livery, pressed coat, polished shoes, the whole thing, which was already strange for their neighborhood. The envelope was cream-colored and thick. Franz held it for a moment before he gave it to Elise, as if he was trying to guess its weight. She opened it at the kitchen table with her morning tea still steaming beside her. The letter was from the household of Duke Maximilian von Hartenberg. It said, in careful formal language, that the Duke was hosting a private gathering that very evening, and that his usual pianist had fallen ill. He had been given Elise's name by a mutual acquaintance. He was requesting her presence at the estate by 7 o'clock. She was asked to prepare Frühlingsstimmen, Voices of Spring, a famous Strauss waltz, and then fill the remainder of the evening as she saw fit. The payment offered was printed at the bottom of the letter. Franz read the number, set the letter down, and looked at his daughter without saying anything. She arrived at the estate a little before 7. The Hartenberg estate was the kind of place that made you feel smaller just by looking at it. Not because it was cruel, it was actually quite beautiful, but because everything was so perfectly arranged, so carefully maintained, that it reminded you instantly that someone with a great deal of money had decided exactly how the world should look, and then made it look that way. Stone steps, iron gates, tall windows lit from inside. A steward led Elise through corridors lined with dark wood paneling and oil portraits of people who all seemed to be looking at something just past your left shoulder. She was brought to a large salon at the end of the hall. The room was quiet. The guests had not yet arrived. In the center of it, beneath a chandelier that threw small pieces of light across the ceiling, sat a Bösendorfer grand piano, the finest instrument she had ever been in the same room with. She set her bag down, sat on the bench, and played one slow scale. The sound filled the room completely, and then settled, like something exhaling. She closed her eyes for just a second. Whatever nerves she had carried through the door dissolved somewhere in those 8 notes. The Duke entered without announcement. He was not what she expected, though she would have struggled to explain what she had expected. He was tall, perhaps 45 or so, with gray beginning at his temples, and a way of holding himself that suggested he had spent a long time learning to look unbothered. He greeted her politely. He thanked her for coming on short notice. He told her the guests would arrive within the hour, and that he hoped the evening would go smoothly. He was already turning to leave when Elise said, quietly but clearly, "Forgive me, is there someone you are hoping to hear this waltz, the Voices of Spring?" He stopped. He did not turn around immediately. There was a pause, not a long one, but the kind that has weight to it. Then he said, over his shoulder, "Play the waltz, Fräulein," and he left the room. Elise sat with that for a moment. Then she straightened her back, folded her hands in her lap, and waited for the guests. They arrived the way guests at these things always do, in clusters, filling the room with the sound of conversation and the soft clink of glasses. About 40 people altogether, ladies in good dresses, men in evening coats. The kind of gathering where everyone knows someone, and everyone is performing something, even when they are only standing still. Elise began to play. The waltz was everything it was supposed to be. Bright and lilting, full of that particular Viennese joy, the kind that sweeps you up and turns you around before you quite realize it has started. She played it cleanly and warmly, the way the piece deserved to be played. Guests smiled. A few tapped their fingers lightly. The room relaxed into the music, the way a room does when the music is good, and the wine is flowing, and the evening has found its rhythm. The Duke stood near the far fireplace. Elise noticed him, without looking at him directly, the way musicians learn to read a room from behind their own concentration. He was standing very still. His expression was the same composed, polite mask it had been when he greeted her. But his hand, the one holding his glass, had tightened. She could see it from where she sat. Just a small thing, just a knuckle going white. She knew that grip. She had learned it herself, standing at her mother's graveside in the rain, holding someone's arm so tightly her fingers went numb, because if she let go, she was afraid she might simply fall. The waltz ended. Applause, warm and generous. She nodded her head in acknowledgement. She was supposed to move on to a light Schubert impromptu. She had it ready. Her hands knew it by heart. She even lifted them toward the keys to begin it. But something stopped her. It was not a decision, exactly. It was more like a door opening in her chest, one she had kept closed for a very long time. Her hands found a different place on the keys. A melody began to come out that she had never played for anyone. She had written it herself in the weeks after her mother died, sitting at her father's old upright piano in the middle of the night, unable to sleep, unable to cry, unable to do anything except put her hands on the keys and let them find the shape of what she was feeling. The piece had no name. She had never given it one. It was not a proper composition. It was just something true. It began very quietly, almost like a question. Then it grew, not loud exactly, but fuller, the way a thought grows when you finally let yourself think it all the way to the end. It moved through something that felt like grief, but it did not rush to get past the grief. It stayed there for a while. It sat with it, the way you sometimes have to just sit with a feeling and let it be what it is before it will agree to soften. The room changed. Conversations stopped, not all at once, but one by one, like candles being covered. People turned toward the piano without quite realizing they had done it. Someone set down a glass. A woman near the window pressed her fingers to her mouth. The sound was doing something to the air in the room, filling it with something unnamed and very real. At the fireplace, Duke Maximilian turned away from the guests. It was a small movement, subtle enough that most people in the room did not notice it. But the footman standing near the door noticed. He described it later, to a housekeeper who told someone else, and the account was passed along in the way that honest moments sometimes travel, carefully, quietly, as if the people telling it understand that they are handling something that could easily be broken. The Duke had turned toward the wall. He pressed 2 fingers to his eyes and held them there. When he turned back, his face was wet. He did not hide it. He did not reach for a handkerchief or turn away again. He simply stood there, in his own salon, in front of 40 people, with tears on his face, listening to a young woman play music she had never shown to another living soul. No one spoke, no one laughed, no one looked away. The music continued. When the last note finally fell and the room went quiet, the silence was different from the silence before. Warmer. The kind of quiet that comes after something true has been said. People began to speak again, softly at first, and then more normally. But something had shifted in the room. Even the people who could not have said what they were feeling knew that they were feeling something. The Duke crossed the salon. He walked directly to the piano and stood before Elise, who was still sitting on the bench, her hands resting in her lap. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. He was not a man who found words easily, and she could see him searching for them. Finally, he said, "What was that piece?" "It has no name," she told him. He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "My wife used to love that waltz. The one you played first. Voices of Spring. She danced to it at our first ball together. She died 7 years ago. I have not—" He stopped. He began again. "I have hosted many evenings since then. Many musicians have played in this room. I have listened to all of them and felt nothing. Tonight was different." Elise did not say anything. She understood that some moments are not for filling with words. He said, "That second piece. It should have a name." "Perhaps," she said. "Call it Irene," he said. That was her name. She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded. Once, quietly. "Irene," she said. "Yes." He thanked her, properly, and without formality, and walked back through the room. In the months that followed, a scholarship fund was established at the Vienna Conservatory. It was created specifically to support young women musicians from modest backgrounds, the first of its kind in the city. The donor gave anonymously. Very few people knew where the money came from, and those who did kept it to themselves out of a kind of respect. Elise was awarded one of the first grants from that fund. It allowed her to spend 2 years studying in Paris, at a conservatory where she worked under one of the finest teachers in Europe. She came back changed, not in her sound exactly, but in her confidence. The confidence of someone who has finally been told, by the world, that what she has to say is worth hearing. Her debut public recital was held the following spring in Vienna. She played a full program, Chopin, Schubert, a piece by a composer she had studied in Paris, and at the very end, without it being listed in the program, she played one more piece. Quiet and unhurried, full of something that sat between grief and gratitude. The audience did not know its name, but everyone who heard it felt that it knew them. She had called it Irene. There is a thing that happens sometimes, not often, but sometimes, where one person's honesty reaches into another person's life and changes its direction entirely. It does not require grand speeches or dramatic events. It only requires one moment, when someone, instead of playing it safe, plays something true. Elise did not know, when she sat down at that piano on a Tuesday evening in spring, that she was about to change a man's life. She was only doing what she had always done, following the music to wherever it needed to go. That is what made it work. That is what it always comes down to. Not performance. Truth.